If you can carry this gold nugget, you can stay. Wealthy miner taunts poor girl, but then the boomtown of Red Creek was alive with dust, clamor, and the clinking of gold pans. Wagons groaned under supplies, and the sharp smell of gunpowder mixed with roasted beans drifted from the saloon porch. But on that morning, no dice games or fiddle tunes could compete with the spectacle unfolding in the center of the square. Augustus Brandt, the wealthiest miner in the territory, stood tall with his velvet waistcoat stretched over a proud belly. His gold pocket watch glinted against the sun, his bowler hat cocked at an angle that suggested both refinement and menace. Around him, the miners of Red Creek laughed, jeered, and muttered, an audience eager for cruelty dressed as entertainment. In front of him, shivering in a faded calico dress, was Clara. She couldn't have been more than 19, her cheeks hollow from days without a proper meal, her shoes so worn the soles had split at the toes. She had arrived at Red Creek alone, no family to shield her, no claim to stake but her own courage. Augustus bent to the leather satchel at his feet and, with exaggerated effort, hoisted a massive gold nugget onto the crate beside him. The nugget was irregular and heavy, as if the earth itself had clenched its fist around sunlight and refused to let go. Gasps rose from the crowd. It must have weighed near 30 pounds. With a sneer curling his lip, Augustus declared, "If you can carry this gold nugget, you can stay." The words hit like a pistol shot. The miners howled with laughter, some slapping their knees, others spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. To them, it was a cruel joke, another story for the saloon later. A poor starving girl attempting the impossible. Clara's eyes fixed on the nugget. Her chest rose and fell quickly, not from fear alone but from the heat of humiliation burning her throat. She had begged for a chance to work at the diggings, any work at all. Sifting, hauling, even scrubbing pans. Instead, she was being made into sport. Somewhere in the crowd, a tall man leaned against a hitching post, arms crossed, face unreadable. Eli Dawson, a miner with more scars than friends, watched silently. He didn't laugh like the others. Clara clenched her fists. Pride stiffened her spine. She stepped forward. "Do you accept, girl?" Augustus asked, his voice booming. She nodded once. Her words were quiet but steady. "I'll carry it." The laughter grew. Augustus waved a hand toward the nugget, as though presenting a circus trick. "Then show us all. Lift it, and prove you belong." Clara approached the crate. Her hands trembled as she brushed the rough surface of the nugget. It was colder than she expected, the metal biting into her palms. The weight pulled at her arms the moment she tried to shift it. Around her, boots scuffed the dirt, men shouting wagers, women whispering whether the girl would faint. Augustus folded his arms, smug as a king watching a jester stumble. Clara bent lower, teeth gritted. She wrapped both arms around the nugget, pressed her cheek to its jagged surface, and pulled with every ounce of strength in her body. For a breathless second, it budged. The crowd went silent. Her knees quivered. Her back arched. Then the nugget slipped from her grasp and crashed back against the crate with a metallic thud that echoed across the square. The silence shattered into roaring laughter. Augustus tipped his hat mockingly. "Run along, girl. This town is no place for the weak." Clara staggered back, her arms shaking but her eyes burned with something fierce and unbroken. As the guards stepped forward to shove her out of town, Eli Dawson shifts his stance, his hand resting near the worn handle of his Colt. "Ótimo. Mas não coloque a palavra cliffhanger. Apenas escreva o texto do cliffhanger quando tiver. Os próximos capítulos precisam ter uma média de 600 a 700 palavras." The square of Red Creek still trembled with laughter. Dust swirled where the nugget had struck the crate, and the jeers of the crowd stung Clara's ears more sharply than any slap. She wanted to rise above it, to stand tall and walk away, but the humiliation weighed heavier than the gold itself. "Out with her!" Augustus barked, his voice sharp as a whip. Two hired men pushed forward, rough-looking fellows with pistols at their hips and whiskey still wetting their beards. Clara's heart thudded. She had nowhere else to go. No family, no wagon waiting down the trail, no homestead to retreat to. Red Creek had been her last hope. To be shoved out now was to be sentenced to wander the wilderness. A girl alone against hunger, wolves, and worse. The miners shouted their approval, some tossing coins toward Augustus's feet as if to thank him for the morning's amusement. The metallic clinks on the dirt sounded like nails being driven into a coffin. She tried to speak, to beg for another chance, but the words caught in her throat. One of the guards grabbed her arm. "Come on, Missy. The camp's no place for beggars." That was when Eli Dawson moved. He stepped from the shadow of the hitching post, tall and steady, his eyes gray as storm clouds. His boots crunched in the dust and the crowd's laughter softened to a murmur. Though his shirt was plain and his hat battered, there was a calm weight to him, the kind men listened to without knowing why. "Hold," Eli said, his voice level. "There's no law says she can't stay." Augustus's brows knitted, the smugness faltering. "And who are you to speak on law in my town?" Eli's gaze did not waver. "This camp doesn't belong to you, Brant. By charter, any soul willing to work has a right to try." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some muttered that Eli was right. Others were too fearful of Augustus's influence to speak aloud. The judge's shack sat at the edge of town, but the judge himself rarely dared cross Augustus. Augustus let out a slow, dangerous chuckle. "Then let her prove it. If she wants to stay, she'll live where no one else dares. Give her the shack by the creek bend. Let her see how long her courage lasts before the wolves drag her off." A ripple of laughter followed. The shack was infamous. A leaning cabin abandoned after 2 prospectors vanished from it in the span of 1 winter. Some said wolves had taken them. Others swore it was fever. Whatever the truth, no miner had set foot inside for years. The guard still gripped Clara's arm. She looked up at Eli, uncertain if he was mocking her or offering a lifeline. His face gave nothing away, yet his eyes held no cruelty. "I'll take it," Clara whispered, her voice thin but steady. The crowd erupted in disbelief. Augustus sneered, his teeth yellow in the sun. "So be it. Let the girl rot in the shack. You've signed your own fate." The guards shoved her toward the edge of town, their laughter trailing after her like a whip crack. Dust coated her throat, her feet stumbling over rocks as she was driven farther from the voices, the smell of coffee and bread fading behind her. At the creek bend, the shack slouched against a cluster of pines. Its roof sagged, its chimney crumbled, and the door hung crooked on rusted hinges. It looked less like a shelter and more like a grave waiting to close over her. The guards left her there with a final shove. One spat into the dirt. "Best keep your fire high, girl. The wolves like the taste of thin bones." Their laughter carried as they rode away. Clara stood alone, staring at the crooked door. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the pines. A cold wind slid through the clearing, carrying with it the faint sound of howls from deep in the forest. Behind her, unnoticed until that moment, Eli Dawson leaned his shoulder against a tree, watching quietly. His hand rested near the worn handle of his Colt, as though he'd been waiting all along. The shack at the creek bend was little more than a skeleton of timber and moss. Clara stood before it, her fingers clenched in the folds of her dress, listening to the wind whistle through its broken boards. The guards had already gone, their laughter carried away by the fading light, leaving only the pines and the restless river for company. She took a step forward, and the door creaked open with a groan, as though the house itself resented her intrusion. The interior was dim, scattered with old pans, a half-broken chair, and the smell of mold that clung to everything. A single cracked window let in a thin shaft of evening light, and in that dusty beam floated the remains of spiderwebs. Behind her, a twig snapped. Clara spun around, her heart hammering. Eli Dawson emerged from the tree line, slow and deliberate, his hat pulled low, the butt of his revolver gleaming in the dusk. "You followed me?" Clara asked, her voice sharp from fear. "I didn't like how Brant left things," Eli said simply. "The law's clear. Any person who can work has the right to a claim. He humiliated you, but that doesn't mean you're without recourse." She blinked at him, startled. "You spoke of law back there, but do laws mean anything here? Not when Augustus buys every judge, every deputy." Eli's jaw tightened. "The frontier runs on more than Brant's word. Some of us still believe in fairness. You've as much right to stand here as any man with a pickaxe." Clara felt something stir in her chest, something she hadn't dared feel in weeks, a flicker of hope. But it faltered when she glanced back at the shack. "And if this place kills me, then you'll have died fighting for what's yours," Eli replied. His tone wasn't cruel. It was matter of fact, the voice of a man who'd seen enough of life's coin tosses to know both sides carried a price. As dusk deepened, Eli moved inside, testing the rotted floorboards with cautious steps. He lit a stub of a candle from his coat pocket, its glow painting his scarred face with warmth. This'll need mending. The roof won't keep a storm out, let alone winter. Clara lowered herself onto the splintered chair, her shoulders sagging. I can scrub pans, I can cook, I can work for my keep, but I don't know how to swing a pick or strike a claim. Work comes in many forms, Eli said, setting the candle on a beam. Some men dig all day and never find a flake. Others stumble on gold while fetching water. What matters is the grit to stay when others quit. His words settled heavy in the air. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter, trying to imagine herself as someone who could endure hunger and fear, who could claw her way into a place among the hardened souls of Red Creek. Outside, the forest had grown restless. An owl hooted from the pines, and the river's rush seemed to grow louder, as though warning of what lurked beyond its banks. Eli paused, head tilted. From the dark distance came another sound, low, guttural, rising in a chorus that made Clara's blood run cold. Wolves. Not one, but several, their howls weaving together into a chilling hymn that shivered through the night. Eli's hand drifted to his revolver. They've scented the shack. Must have been using it for shelter themselves. Clara's breath caught. You mean, it's theirs? He nodded once, grim. For now, but tonight we'll see who claims it come morning. The candle flickered violently as another howl broke closer, echoing against the timber walls. Clara clutched the edge of the chair, staring at the door that rattled gently on its hinges, each gust of wind carrying with it the promise of teeth and eyes gleaming in the dark. The first nights in the shack nearly broke Clara. The roof leaked when the rain came, dripping onto her blanket until her skin was clammy and cold. The walls did little to keep out the wind that rattled through the pines, and more than once she heard the crunch of paws outside, the sniffing and scratching of wolves prowling close. Each time, Eli fired a warning shot into the night sky, and their howls scattered like smoke on the wind. But only for a while. Hunger gnawed at her just as fiercely. Augustus had made certain no storekeeper would sell her food on credit, and Clara had no coins to her name. The river yielded fish only to those with patience and skill. She had neither, only raw fingers from trying. By the third day, her stomach cramped so violently that she curled on the shack floor, clutching herself like a child. It was then that she first met Martha. The old woman appeared at dusk wrapped in a patched shawl, her hair silver as frost. She carried a small basket in one hand and knocked lightly at the leaning door. Clara, startled, rushed to open it. I reckon you could use this, Martha said, setting the basket down. Inside lay a loaf of coarse bread and 2 apples, shriveled but sweet-smelling. Don't ask how I came by it. Some things ain't for questions. Clara's throat tightened. Why would you help me? The others are afraid of Brant. Martha's eyes were sharp despite her age. I've felt his cruelty myself. Years ago, when I came with my husband, Augustus cheated him out of a claim. Laughed as he watched us pack our things. My husband died in the hills not long after. She drew a breath, steady and bitter. I'll not see him grind you under the same boot if I can help it. Tears blurred Clara's vision as she tore a piece of bread and chewed slowly, letting the rough crust ease into her empty stomach. It was the best meal she had tasted in weeks. Martha spread a wool blanket over Clara's shoulders, her hands surprisingly strong. You've got fire in you, girl. I saw it when you tried to lift that nugget. Don't let Brant's laughter smother it. That night, for the first time, Clara slept without her teeth chattering. The wolves still howled, but wrapped in Martha's blanket she felt less alone. Eli came and went silently, keeping watch from the trees, and she began to understand that, though neither man nor woman had said as much, they both believed she deserved a chance. Days passed, lean and testing. Clara gathered sticks for the fire, mended holes in the shack with scraps of bark and cloth, and learned to snare rabbits from a few knots Eli showed her. She grew thinner still, but her will hardened. One morning, after a rainstorm had churned the earth soft, Clara knelt by the creek bend to wash her hands. The soil crumbled beneath her fingers, darker and heavier than usual. Something glimmered faintly in the mud. She frowned, pushing aside the pebbles until her nails scraped against something hard. It was small, no larger than her thumbnail, but it shone with a luster unlike any stone. She rubbed it clean against her skirt, and her breath caught. The color was unmistakable. Deep burning yellow, brighter than sunlight. A gold nugget. Clara stared at it in disbelief, the world narrowing to that single spark in her palm. Behind her the river kept rushing, the pines whispering as though they too had witnessed a secret about to change everything. Clara turned the nugget over in her palm again and again, hardly believing it was real. Even small as it was, the weight felt different, denser, alive somehow, as though it carried the promise of a future she had thought lost. The morning sun caught its surface and scattered gold light across her face. For a moment, the hunger and humiliation of the last weeks vanished, replaced by wonder. When Eli arrived at the shack that afternoon, carrying a bundle of firewood over his shoulder, Clara ran to meet him. Her eyes shone brighter than the creek itself. "Look," she whispered, opening her hand. The nugget gleamed, and she almost laughed with relief. "I found it in the mud by the river. It's real, isn't it?" Eli set down the firewood and studied the piece. He rolled it between calloused fingers, his expression grave but not dismissive. "It's real enough. Coarse gold, likely washed down from higher ground." Her heart raced. "Then there could be more?" "Where there's a little," Eli said, handing it back to her. "There may be a lot. Streams don't hold on to gold, they carry it. If you follow it back, you might find the vein it came from." His gaze sharpened. "But that's also how trouble begins. Gold doesn't hide itself forever. Sooner or later, someone else sees the shine." Clara closed her fingers around the nugget. "I won't let Augustus take this from me. Not again. This is proof I belong here." Eli's mouth curved just slightly. "Then keep your wits about you. Guard it close. And if you find more, don't tell a soul but me and Martha. Promise me that." She nodded, though part of her longed to shout her discovery from the rooftops. The thought of Brant's smug face when she'd been laughed out of town burned in her memory. To show him she wasn't weak. That was a temptation as bright as the nugget itself. That night, she showed it to Martha, who traced the little stone with trembling fingers. "Your fortune's begun, child. My John used to say a single nugget can turn a life, but it can also paint a target on your back." She pressed the piece back into Clara's hand. "Don't flash it. Keep it tucked away. Some men would kill you for less." Clara sewed a pocket inside her dress and hid the nugget there, close to her heart. The knowledge of it gave her strength. Each morning she rose earlier, combing the creek bed with her bare hands, scanning the soil for another glimmer. She found nothing else that week, but the hope inside her was enough to banish despair. She didn't know that Augustus Brant had already begun to hear whispers. One of his hired men, a sharp-eyed fellow named Finch, had been skulking near the creek. He saw Clara kneeling, searching, her face alight with something he recognized all too well, hope born of gold. Later that evening, Finch carried the story back to the saloon, where Brant sat with a whiskey in one hand and dice in the other. "She's been digging at the bend every day," Finch reported. "Saw her slip something into her dress. Looked like color to me." Brant froze, the dice clattering to the table. His eyes narrowed, sharp as a hawk's. "Gold? On my land? It wasn't much. Just a speck, maybe," Finch shrugged. "But she guards it close." A slow smile spread across Augustus's face. "Then the fool girl stumbled onto something she has no right to. If there's color in that bend, there's more. And whatever she's found, it belongs to me." He lifted his glass, his reflection glimmering in the amber liquid. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "we'll see just how much the little stray has uncovered." The morning broke sharp and clear, the air crisp with pine and damp earth. Clara walked the creek's edge with Eli close behind, his rifle balanced casually against his shoulder. She had insisted on searching upstream, convinced the little nugget had been carried down from higher ground. Each step deeper into the hills felt like trespass, on fate, on Augustus Brant's invisible rule, but also like freedom. The trail narrowed as the creek bent into a rocky pass. Granite walls rose on either side, casting long shadows that the sun had not yet touched. Clara crouched by the water, washing her hands free of mud when Eli's head snapped up. His hand drifted toward his revolver. "What is it?" she whispered. "Quiet," Eli murmured. His eyes scanned the ridges above. The silence broke with a harsh voice. "Well, well, looks like the stray dog brought herself a keeper." 3 riders appeared at the top of the pass, rifles slung low. Their leader, Finch, tipped his hat mockingly as he guided his horse down the slope. The other two spread wide, blocking any way out. Eli stepped forward, his stance relaxed but coiled. "You boys took a wrong turn," Finch sneered. "Not hardly. Brant says the creek bend's his, and anything pulled from it belongs to him." His eyes slid toward Clara. "That means whatever she's hiding in that dress pocket, too." Clara stiffened, her hand pressing instinctively against the hidden stitch where the nugget lay. Eli's voice stayed calm, though the air between them buzzed like a drawn blade. "The charter says unclaimed ground is free to any who work it. Brant can't own every pebble in these hills." Finch spat in the dirt. "Charters don't mean a damn when a man like Brant holds the town. Step aside, Dawson. We'll take the girl back with us. She's had her fun." Eli shook his head slowly. "Not today." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Finch's hand darted for his revolver. The report of Eli's Colt split the air before Finch's weapon even cleared the holster. His hat flew back as he toppled from the saddle, eyes wide with shock. The other two scrambled, one firing wildly, the bullet sparking against stone. Clara flattened against the creek bed, her ears ringing. Eli moved like water over rock, steady and unhurried. His second shot dropped the man on the left. The third rider bolted, spurring his horse up the ridge and vanishing into the trees. The pass fell silent again but for the echo of gunfire. Smoke curled lazily from Eli's revolver as he reloaded with calm precision. Clara pushed herself up, trembling. She had never seen death so close, nor violence carried out with such frightening ease. Eli holstered his weapon and glanced at her. "You all right?" She nodded, though her legs felt made of straw. "They were going to kill us." "They were going to scare you first," Eli corrected. "Sometimes fear's a sharper blade than lead." He kicked Finch's fallen pistol into the creek, where the water swallowed it whole. Clara swallowed hard, forcing herself to steady. "Brant won't stop. You know that." Eli gave a dry, humorless smile. "No, he won't. Which is why we find what you came here for before he does." Together they pressed farther up the narrow pass. The morning sun finally crept over the ridge, spilling light onto the granite walls. Clara trailed a hand against the rock as she walked, and froze. Her fingers brushed across something rough and glittering. She leaned closer. A vein of stone cracked open in the wall, and within its jagged seam glowed flecks of gold, bright as fire where the sunlight struck. Her breath caught. The very mountain seemed to bleed gold before her eyes. Clara pressed her palm flat against the crack in the granite, her breath coming in shallow bursts. The flecks of yellow weren't just scattered dust. They ran deep inside the stone, caught within veins of milky quartz that shimmered under the sun. She scraped gently with her fingernail, and a flake of gold broke free, catching the light like fire. Eli crouched beside her, his expression unreadable. He ran his thumb along the seam, then rapped the stone with the butt of his revolver. The sound rang sharp and solid. "It's not just color," he murmured. "It's a vein." Clara looked at him, half afraid, half exhilarated. "Does that mean—" "It means you found what most men waste their whole lives chasing." His gray eyes flicked to hers. "And it means Brant won't rest until it's his." Her heart pounded, torn between pride and dread. She had dreamt of finding something like this, but never imagined the weight of it would feel so heavy before she even lifted a pick. They worked quietly for the rest of the morning, Eli marking the stone with his knife, Clara gathering loose fragments from the base. Each handful of quartz gleamed with golden threads, proof enough that this was no stray pocket but a seam running deeper into the mountain. When the sun stood high, they wrapped the fragments in cloth and began the hike back to the shack. Clara felt as if every tree watched her. Every crow in the branches was a spy ready to carry news to Augustus. By the time they reached the clearing, Martha was waiting on the porch. Her shawl flapped in the breeze, her face creased with worry. "You've been gone long," she said, her sharp eyes scanning the bundle in Clara's arms. Clara couldn't contain her excitement. She pulled back the cloth just enough to reveal the sparkling quartz. "We found it, Martha. Not just a nugget, an entire vein. Look at it." The old woman's face paled. She touched the stone with trembling fingers, then drew her hand back as though it burned. "Child, do you know what you're holding?" Clara laughed softly, though the sound shook. "A future. A chance to live without begging." "No." Martha's voice hardened, low and urgent. You're holding a death warrant, Clara faltered, her smile fading. What do you mean? Eli watched silently, his jaw tight, as Martha sank onto the porch step. She seemed older than ever in that moment, her shoulders bowed by memories too heavy to bear. Years ago, she said, staring at the ground, 2 brothers staked a claim not far from here. Honest men. They struck rich, quartz so full of gold it glowed like fire at dawn. They thought they could build a life. Clara swallowed. What happened to them? Martha's eyes lifted, sharp and haunted. Augustus happened. He smiled, drank with them, even offered to buy their claim. But when they refused, both were found dead in their cabin. Some said it was fever. Others whispered wolves. But I saw the truth. Bullet holes in the walls, blood on the dirt. And Brant walked away with their land papers in his pocket. Clara's breath hitched, the quartz bundle suddenly heavy in her lap. She glanced at Eli, who gave the smallest nod, confirming the story was no wild tale. Martha leaned forward, her voice a rasp. Don't think for a second that man will hesitate to do the same to you. Gold to Brant isn't fortune, it's power, and he'll kill as many times as he must to keep it. The wind stirred the pines, carrying with it the faint echo of wolves, though it was still broad daylight. Clara held the shining quartz close, torn between the brilliance of her discovery and the darkness it had summoned into her world. By the time Clara reached her decision, the morning sky was streaked with pink and silver. She hadn't slept. The quartz with its golden veins lay wrapped in a cloth under her pillow, as though it were alive and might vanish if left unattended. Eli said they couldn't wait any longer. If the claim wasn't registered, Augustus would sweep in and take it, just as he had with the brothers Martha spoke of. So Clara dressed in her patched calico, smoothed her hair with trembling fingers, and walked toward Red Creek with Eli at her side. Every step down the dirt track felt heavier than the last, the weight of what she carried hidden in her satchel tugging at her shoulder. The town buzzed with its usual fever, men shouting bids outside the assay tent, dice clattering on the saloon porch, horses stamping in the dust. But as Clara passed, conversations hushed. People stared. Word had traveled quickly. Some whispered with pity, others with a kind of cruel curiosity. The courthouse was nothing more than a plank building with a crooked sign reading claims and records. Inside, a scarred desk sat piled with maps and ledgers. Judge Harper, a stooped man with spectacles forever sliding down his nose, looked up as Clara entered. His quill hovered, dripping ink. "You here to file, miss?" he asked. Clara nodded, placing the wrapped cloth gently on the desk. She unrolled it just enough for the judge to glimpse the glittering veins. Gasps rose from the handful of miners lounging in the room. Judge Harper's brows rose high. "Well, I'll be. Haven't seen stone like this in years. Where'd you find it?" "Near the creek bend," Clara said, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "On ground no one has claimed. I want it recorded in my name." Before Harper could dip his quill, the door slammed open. The smell of whiskey and cigar smoke rolled in with Augustus Brant. He filled the doorway like a storm cloud, his waistcoat gleaming, eyes sharp as knives. "That ground's mine," he barked, striding forward. "Always has been. Ask anyone." Clara's heart lurched, but she held her ground. "It was abandoned. You never filed it." A murmur ran through the room. Men shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Augustus's glare. He spread his hands with mock patience. "The Ben's been under my care for years. Everyone knows it. This girl's a trespasser, nothing more." Eli stepped forward, his voice calm but cutting. "The charter's clear, Brant. No claim stands unless it's written. You never filed, so it isn't yours." The judge cleared his throat nervously, glancing between Augustus and the crowd. His quill trembled. "Well now, perhaps we should sort this properly. It wouldn't be right to sign off without hearing both sides." Augustus leaned across the desk, his shadow falling over Clara. "This is a waste of ink. That gold belongs to me." Clara's voice broke through, sharper than she thought possible. "No, it belongs to the one who found it. And I did." The room stilled. For a moment it seemed the judge might collapse under the weight of Augustus's glare. Then Harper straightened as much as his bent spine allowed and cleared his throat again. "There'll be a hearing," he declared, forcing firmness into his tone. "Tomorrow morning, both parties will present their case and I'll render judgment. That's the law." Augustus's smile was cold, slow, like a knife sliding free of its sheath. He tipped his bowler hat toward Clara. "Tomorrow, then. Let's see how long your courage lasts when the whole town's watching." Clara stood rigid, her satchel clutched tight, knowing she had less than a day to prove her right, or lose everything to the man who had ruined so many lives before hers. The morning of the hearing dawned heavy with dust and expectation. By the time Clara stepped into the cramped courthouse, the benches were full. Miners with mud still on their boots, women clutching shawls tight against their shoulders, boys peering in through open windows. All had gathered to watch the spectacle. Clara's palms were damp as she clutched her satchel. Eli walked beside her, silent, his jaw set hard. Martha squeezed Clara's hand before slipping into a seat near the back, her eyes fierce with worry. Judge Harper sat behind the desk, spectacles perched low, shuffling papers with shaking hands. He looked smaller than ever in front of the crowd, his frailty obvious, but his gavel struck with surprising force when he called, "Court is now in session." Augustus Brant strode forward like a man entering his own parlor. His waistcoat gleamed, his bowler hat was set just so, and the smug curl of his lips silenced even the whispers. Behind him stood two men in clean coats, their faces grave with rehearsed dignity. "The matter at hand," Harper began, "concerns the disputed ownership of a claim at the creek bend. Miss Clara Winters contends she discovered a vein of gold there, unclaimed by law. Mr. Brant contends the ground is his by prior right." Augustus stepped smoothly into the center. "Not just by right," he said, his voice booming, "but by witness." He gestured to the two men behind him. The first adjusted his coat and bowed slightly. "Name's Wilkes. I've worked Brant's lands these 5 years. That creek bend's been his since I arrived. I've seen him ride the boundary myself." The second spoke quickly, eyes darting to Augustus. "Saw the girl nosing about where she didn't belong. She's no miner. She's a trespasser, plain as day." The crowd murmured approval. Judge Harper scribbled notes, his quill scratching loudly. Clara's stomach churned. She wanted to shout, to call them liars, but the weight of the room pressed down on her. Augustus's smile widened, feeding on the hush. When it was her turn to speak, Clara rose, clutching the wrapped quartz in both hands. Her voice trembled but carried. "I found this with my own hands. No one had filed, no one had worked the ground, it was abandoned. That makes it mine." She unrolled the cloth, revealing the glittering veins of gold. A gasp swept through the room, but it was quickly drowned by Augustus's mocking laugh. "Trinkets picked from the mud," he scoffed. "Hardly proof of a vein. She's a girl with no skill, no claim, no place here. Ask yourselves, good men, would you let your own daughters squat on another's land and steal his fortune?" The words cut deep. Laughter rippled through the benches, low and cruel. Clara felt her face flush hot, her throat burning. For a moment, the walls blurred and she thought she might collapse under the weight of their scorn. Judge Harper shifted uneasily, his quill pausing. He looked at Clara with pity, not conviction. Augustus's victory seemed sealed. From the back of the room, Martha's voice cracked the air like a whip. "Shame on you, all of you. You cheer a man who's crushed widows and stolen graves from the dead." But her protest was drowned by jeers and shouts demanding silence. Clara's knees trembled. She lowered her gaze, clutching the quartz close, certain that Augustus had won. Then, from the bench beside her, Eli Dawson rose slowly to his feet. His broad shoulders blocked the sunlight streaming through the window, his gray eyes cutting across the room. "I have evidence," he said, his voice steady, carrying over the noise. "Proof that Brant's words are lies." The courthouse fell silent. All eyes turned to him, the air suddenly tight with anticipation. Eli's words hung in the air, steady as iron. The courthouse, moments before alive with jeers, fell silent. Even Judge Harper paused, his quill frozen above the page. Augustus let out a scoff, though the twitch at the corner of his mouth betrayed unease. "Proof? From a drifter who spends his days nursing whiskey bottles? Let's hear it then." Without hurry, Eli reached into his coat and unfolded a packet of worn papers, edges yellowed and creased from years of use. He spread them on the judge's desk, his rough fingers smoothing the fragile parchment. "These are survey maps," Eli explained, his voice low but carrying. "Drawn when this camp was first marked. They show every claim filed in those years. Look here." He tapped the bend of the creek sketched in fine ink. No name, no stamp, no filing. It was never Brant's. The crowd leaned forward, murmuring. Some recognized the marks. The official seal faded but still legible. Judge Harper squinted, adjusting his spectacles. "Where did you come by these?" "Carried them since the war," Eli answered. "My brother worked the survey crew. He gave them to me before he fell at Shiloh. I've kept them all this time." Harper traced the creek's bend with a trembling finger. It does appear the land was never claimed." A ripple of unease ran through the benches. Men who'd cheered Augustus now exchanged wary glances. Martha clasped her hands tight, her eyes shining with vindication. Clara felt her chest swell with cautious hope, though her fingers dug into the cloth that held the quartz. Augustus's face darkened. The smug smile faltered, replaced by a snarl. "Maps and scratches don't mean a thing when the whole town knows I've ridden that land for years. I've guarded it, kept it safe. That makes it mine by right. That makes you a squatter." Eli shot back. "Nothing more." The words struck like a lash. Augustus slammed his fist on the judge's desk, rattling the ink pot. "Careful, Dawson. You think these papers will save you? You think this girl's word will stand against mine?" His eyes swept the room, his voice rising with fury. "I built this town. Every man here eats because of my mines. You dare strip me of what I've bled for?" Judge Harper shifted uneasily, sweat beading on his brow. He glanced at the maps, then at Augustus's towering frame. His lips moved as though forming judgment, but no words came. Clara stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "You didn't build this town. You stole it piece by piece from those too weak to fight back, but you won't steal from me." The crowd erupted, some shouting agreement, others cursing. The benches shook with the force of voices rising, anger and fear tangled together. Augustus drew himself up, his face red, his eyes blazing like coals. His hand hovered near the butt of his revolver. "One more word, girl, and I'll—" A sharp crack shattered the air, then another. Gunfire, not from Augustus, but from outside the courthouse. Screams echoed through the street, the sound of boots pounding, horses rearing in panic. Bullets punched through the wooden walls, splinters flying. One shattered the window, spraying glass across the floor. Judge Harper ducked behind his desk, the quill clattering to the ground. The townsfolk scrambled for cover, knocking over benches in a storm of chaos. Clara threw herself against the wall, clutching her satchel, heart pounding in her throat. Eli's revolver was already in his hand, his stance firm as stone. He glanced at the shattered window, then back at Clara. "It's not over," he said grimly. Another volley of shots tore through the street, closer this time, as though Red Creek itself had erupted into war. The courthouse doors burst open, and the crowd spilled into the street like cattle driven by fire. Gunfire cracked from every direction, echoing off the clapboard walls of Red Creek. Smoke rose in thin, choking plumes, and the air was filled with the sharp scent of gunpowder. Clara stumbled into the dust, clutching her satchel tight. Eli's hand gripped her shoulder, steadying her as they ducked behind a tipped-over water trough. Martha, shawl fluttering, hobbled close behind, her eyes blazing despite her years. Across the square, men loyal to Augustus Brant had taken positions. On the saloon porch, behind stacks of lumber, even atop the blacksmith's roof. Their rifles spat fire into the panicked crowd, driving townsfolk to scatter and hide. "They're not just scaring folks," Eli muttered, loading his revolver with quick practice motions. "They're seizing the town." Martha clutched the trough's edge. "The greedy devils making war over gold." A bullet smacked into the wood inches from Clara's face, spraying splinters. She gasped, ducking lower. Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the satchel. Eli shoved it against her chest. "Hold on to that," he ordered. "Don't let it out of your sight." Clara nodded, her heart pounding. She had never known fear so sharp, so immediate. Every gunshot seemed aimed directly at her, every shout a signal of doom. And yet beneath the terror, a spark of defiance burned. This was her claim, her discovery. She would not give it up. Eli leaned out, firing 2 quick shots toward the saloon porch. One of Brant's men dropped, clutching his shoulder. The other scrambled for cover. "Move!" Eli barked, grabbing Clara's arm. Together they dashed toward a row of wagons abandoned near the general store. Martha hobbled after them, faster than Clara thought possible for her frail frame. They pressed against the wagon wheels as bullets pinged off the iron rims. Clara crouched low, peering through the spokes. Across the square, Augustus himself strode out from the saloon, a rifle slung across his chest. His men cheered at the sight of him. "Find the girl," Augustus bellowed, his voice carrying over the chaos. "Bring me what she stole." Clara's breath caught. He wasn't after control of the town alone. He wanted her claim, the quartz in her satchel. The thought twisted her fear into fury. Martha grabbed her hand, squeezing tight. "Don't you lose hope now, child. Hope's the only weapon we've got left." Gunfire rattled again. Eli fired back, his movements calm, deliberate, honed by battles long before Red Creek. But the odds were against them. For every man he dropped, two more seemed to appear. "Stay down," Eli ordered, glancing at Clara. "Whatever happens, you keep yourself alive. Promise me that." She shook her head violently. "Not without you." Another volley of shots rang out. One struck the wagon with a deafening crack, splinters raining down. Clara threw up her arms, but Eli moved faster. He lunged across her, shielding her body with his own, as the bullet tore through the air. The force knocked him back against the wagon wheel. For a heartbeat, Clara didn't understand. Then she saw the dark stain spreading across his shirt, just below the ribs. His revolver clattered to the ground. He grimaced, his face pale but steady, as he slumped against the wagon. Clara's scream was swallowed by the thunder of gunfire, her hands reaching for him as the satchel of gold weighed heavy against her chest. Eli's blood stained the dust dark where he leaned against the wagon wheel. Clara knelt beside him, pressing her shawl hard against the wound, desperate to stop the flow. His face had gone pale, but his eyes stayed sharp, fixed on hers. "Don't waste yourself on me," he muttered through clenched teeth. "You've got to finish this." "I won't leave you," Clara whispered fiercely. Her hands trembled, slick with blood, but she pressed harder. "Not while you still breathe." He caught her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong despite the wound. "Listen, girl, Brant won't stop until he breaks you or takes what's yours. If you want a life here, you've got to fight him, not run. You hear me?" Her throat closed, but she nodded. She could see the truth in his eyes. This wasn't just about gold anymore. It was about dignity, survival, and proving that Augustus Brant could not decide the fate of every soul in Red Creek. Martha crouched close, shielding them from the rain of dust kicked up by frantic hooves. "I'll tend to him," she said firmly. "You go, child. Take that satchel and face the devil head on. It's the only way." Clara looked between them, the woman who had given her bread, the man who had risked his life for her. She felt the weight of the satchel against her ribs, the quartz hard and unyielding like her resolve. Slowly she rose. Her legs shook, but her spine straightened. "Then I'll face him." The battle in the street waned as Augustus's men pulled back, regrouping. The courthouse loomed like a battered ship in the storm, windows shattered, door hanging crooked. Clara walked toward it, every eye following. Miners whispered, townsfolk peered from behind barrels and broken shutters. Word was spreading. This fight was no longer about a strip of land. It was about whether a poor girl could stand against the most powerful man in Red Creek. Inside, the judge's desk was still standing, though ink had spilled across the floorboards. Judge Harper himself trembled behind it, spectacles cracked from flying glass. He looked up as Clara entered, his face a mask of fear and exhaustion. Augustus stood in the center of the room, untouched by dust or doubt. His men flanked the walls, rifles glinting in the dim light. When he saw Clara, a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Well," he drawled, "the stray returns. I half expected you'd run with your tail tucked, but here you are, clutching your stolen rocks like they mean something." Clara met his gaze, her voice steady. "They mean more than you'll ever understand." Augustus chuckled darkly. He reached into a leather satchel by his side and drew out something heavy. With deliberate motion, he set it on the judge's desk. It was the same massive gold nugget he had mocked her with on her first day in town, the weight of her humiliation given form. Its dull gleam filled the ruined room with memory and menace. He pushed it toward her. "If you can carry this nugget," he said, his voice echoing, "then maybe, just maybe, you deserve to stay. Show them all your strength, girl, or prove once and for all that you're nothing but a beggar." The room fell silent. Every breath, every heartbeat seemed to wait on Clara's choice as she stared at the symbol of her shame. now laid before her again. The nugget sat on the judge's desk like a challenge forged from the earth itself. Dust motes swirled in the fractured light streaming through the courthouse window, settling over the gold as though time itself had paused. Every eye was fixed on Clara, waiting to see if she would crumble as she had before. Her throat tightened. That first day replayed in her mind, her knees buckling, the laughter echoing through the square, Augustus's sneer cutting deeper than any knife. Shame had nearly destroyed her then. But now she thought of Martha's bread, of Eli bleeding to protect her, of the wolves at her door and the nights she had endured alone. She stepped forward. Her fingers brushed the nugget, cold and rough beneath her skin. For a moment she froze. Her heart hammered so loudly it drowned out the murmurs of the crowd. Then she gripped it with both hands. The weight nearly tore her arms from their sockets. Pain flared through her shoulders, down her spine, as the massive lump of gold strained against gravity. She staggered, knees bending, but refused to let go. Gasps rippled through the room. Her eyes burned with tears, not of weakness, but of defiance. She drew the nugget tight to her chest, muscles screaming, and slowly straightened. Inch by inch she rose, her breath ragged, her body trembling under the burden. "She's doing it," someone whispered. The courthouse erupted with shouts. Some cheered, others jeered, but Clara heard none of it. All she knew was the fire in her chest, the strength born not from her arms but from the will that had carried her through hunger, cold, and fear. Her vision blurred. Sweat stung her eyes. Tears streaked her cheeks, but still she held the nugget high enough for all to see. Augustus's face twisted with disbelief. His smile faltered, and for the first time, a shadow of doubt flickered in his eyes. Clara's voice rang out, choked, but fierce. "I belong here. I earned this. No one, least of all you, will take it from me." The room shook with the force of her words. Even Judge Harper, hunched behind his desk, leaned forward as if witnessing something greater than a legal dispute. Clara's arms trembled violently, her muscles near collapse. Every second was agony, but she clung tighter, refusing to surrender. Augustus's lips curled into a snarl. The room's energy shifted as he stepped forward, his boots thudding across the boards. His hand shot out, fingers curling like claws, reaching for the nugget as if to rip it from her grasp. Clara gasped, bracing herself, as the weight of gold and Augustus's fury closed in all at once. Augustus's hand clamped down on the nugget, his face contorted with rage as he tried to wrench it from Clara's trembling arms. The crowd gasped, some shouting for him to stop, others frozen in shock. The judge rose halfway from his chair, his spectacles sliding down his nose. "Enough," Harper cried, his gavel striking the desk. "This is not a trial, it's an assault." But Augustus didn't release his grip. Clara's knuckles whitened as she held fast, the veins in her arms straining as much from fury as from the weight of the gold. "You can't take it," she shouted, her voice raw. Augustus shoved her backward. She staggered but did not fall, clutching the nugget to her chest. Murmurs surged through the room, no longer tinged with amusement but with outrage. The sight of the town's most powerful man manhandling a girl for all to see had shifted something deep in the people watching. From the back of the room, a voice broke through the din, hoarse but strong. "That land isn't his." Heads turned. Eli Dawson stood in the doorway, pale and unsteady, one arm wrapped around his ribs where blood stained his shirt. Yet his eyes burned clear as he stepped into the room, revolver loose in his other hand. "Brant never filed a claim," Eli continued. His words carried the weight of judgment itself. "I've shown the maps, you all saw them. This girl found that gold fair, by right of labor and by law of this territory." Gasps rippled through the benches. Martha rushed to his side, trying to steady him, but Eli shook her off with grim determination. His gaze never left Augustus. Clara's heart leapt. For a moment she forgot the weight of the nugget, forgot even the fear. Eli was alive, standing, and his voice gave her strength. Judge Harper slammed his gavel again. "I've seen enough. The claim belongs to Clara Winters. And as for you, Brant, your conduct today will be recorded. This court won't be your stage for tyranny any longer." The words ignited the crowd. Miners who once looked away now stood tall, their voices rising in anger. "He's cheated us all," one shouted. "Stole claims, drove men to ruin," another cried. Women added their fury. calling out the hunger, the grief, the years of silence they had endured under Brant's shadow. For the first time in memory, Augustus Brant looked less like a king and more like a cornered wolf. His smugness faltered under the weight of the crowd's fury. Clara pressed the nugget tight against her chest, her body shaking. She could feel the tide turning, the strength of the town no longer behind Augustus, but against him. But Augustus was not a man to bow. His sneer returned, uglier than before. "You think you can strip me of what's mine with words and scraps of paper?" His hand slid to the rifle slung across his back. With one swift motion, he jerked it forward, the metallic click of the lever echoing like thunder. The room erupted in screams as Augustus raised the weapon, his eyes wild. The courthouse exploded into chaos. Augustus swung his rifle upward, but before he could fire, Eli's voice cut through the uproar. "Down!" he roared, pushing Clara aside as he raised his revolver. The shot rang out, cracking through the din. Augustus staggered, the rifle flying from his hands as the bullet tore through the wood floor near his boots. He cursed, enraged, and lunged for the weapon again. But the crowd was no longer frozen. Miners surged forward, men who had once bowed their heads in silence. Rough hands grabbed Augustus's arms, dragging him down. Women shouted curses as they hurled whatever they could reach, bottles, scraps of wood, until the mighty Brant lay pinned beneath the weight of the very people he had ruled. "Hold him fast!" Judge Harper shouted from his desk, his gavel striking until the clamor began to ebb. "This man answers for his crimes today," Augustus thrashed, his face red with fury. "You think you can do this to me? I am this town. You're nothing without me." But the words rang hollow now. The spell was broken. Clara stood in the center of the wrecked room, clutching the massive nugget. Her arms trembled, not from weakness but from the enormity of the moment. She looked at Augustus, spitting, raging, powerless, and then at the crowd, their faces alight with something she had not seen before. Hope. Eli limped to her side, Martha steadying his wounded arm. Though pale, his smile was steady. "It's over," he murmured. Judge Harper cleared his throat, his voice carrying. "By authority vested in this court, I hereby recognize Clara Winters as rightful claimant of the vein at the creek bend. Let the record show it belongs to her alone." The room erupted with cheers, raw and unrestrained. Some shouted her name, others simply wept. Clara's knees nearly buckled, but Eli's hand on her shoulder held her steady. Augustus's roar was drowned by the sound of chains as the deputies finally clamped iron cuffs around his wrists. He was dragged from the courthouse, still spitting threats, but no one listened anymore. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, spilling light across the battered square. Townsfolk gathered, their voices raised, not in jeers this time, but in praise. Martha pressed Clara's hands around the nugget, her voice thick with emotion. "Lift it, child. Not for him, for yourself." Clara looked down at the rough, gleaming lump of gold, the same that had once been her shame. She drew in a deep breath and raised it high, not caring about the strain in her arms. The crowd roared, the sound rolling across Red Creek like thunder. To them, the gold was no longer Brant's weapon of cruelty, but a symbol of something greater: resilience, justice, and the triumph of the weak over the mighty. Tears streamed down Clara's cheeks as she stood tall, the nugget glinting in the sunlight. She was no longer the girl mocked and shoved aside. She was a miner, a fighter, and perhaps a leader. Eli, his face drawn with pain but proud, leaned close enough for only her to hear. "You've done more than claim a vein. You've claimed this town's heart." Clara lowered the nugget slowly, cradling it to her chest. Around her, the voices of Red Creek rose in a chorus of freedom. For the first time since she had set foot in the dusty camp, she belonged, and in that moment, she knew the mine would not just be her salvation. With Eli and Martha beside her, it would be the foundation of something stronger than gold: community, dignity, and hope for a better life carved out of the hard earth. The nugget gleamed one last time in the afternoon light, not as a symbol of humiliation, but of victory. If Clara's fight for dignity and justice moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your take on her journey. And if you enjoy stories of resilience and triumph in the Old West, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one.